Yo, what's up, everybody? And happy Halloween to all of my viewers who celebrate it. And if not, just happy 31st of October, I guess. And with today's holiday or non-holiday, we'll be starting a brand new What If series, that being What If Naruto was a Warlock? Now, you guys might be wondering if Naruto is getting like a grimoire from Black Clover. Is that how he's getting magic? Nope. Nope, it's completely different. This is more like a fan fiction. So something a little different than what I usually do is where I take the character and I take the anime and I just slam them together. This is actually more different than my usual style, but I hope you guys like it. So if you do, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe and all the good stuff. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Give me the that dopamine. I don't know. Anyway, go and comment down below what you think of this part and everything else that's I got coming out in the future. Just a quick little update for those of you who are still here. Thank you. What if Subaru with Sukuna's Vessel will be coming out pretty soon. I have Deku Rewind. What if Deku had Rewinds part 12 coming out. That'll be covering, I think, most of the final arcs, at least that are in the anime. And then after that, I'll be doing Stage 6 Pass again. So that's sort of the plan. Anyway, enough of me talking. Let's get into the actual story for What If Naruto was a Warlock. Okay, so this video will actually be spread into two parts. This video being part 1, and then part 2 will be coming out within the hour or next. So first things first, we have to do is explain exactly how this is going to happen, the lore, and what is going on, and what am I changing. So as I already stated in the intro that you guys watched before, you know, everything, this version of my What If will not be including any other animes or anything. There's not going to be any world crossing here. This is purely in the Naruto universe with purely an addition, more fanfiction-like. So let's actually get into the story, starting off with just a bit of context. So in this version of this What If, Kaguya and Ishiki weren't the only Otsutsuki to come to Earth, much like how we've seen in the Boruto universe. Instead, we had like people like Oroshiki and Momoshiki coming. We actually have another Otsutsuki who went with, this being Kaguya's twin sister, her slightly younger twin sister, Kagura. Kagura is the reason that Kaguya is actually weaker than Ishiki, even though Ishiki and Kaguya should be on the same level in terms of power, because Kagura, when they were both, you know, being born as Otsutsukis and were twins, stole some of the power. So a result of this is that Kaguya is naturally weaker than she would be. This would actually cause a grudge between the two sisters, and so when they finally arrived to the planet, they would have split up, with Kaguya having a fight with her sister, threatening to kill her. This causing Kagura to escape west, further away from the eastern nations where they were going to plant the chakra tree. Kaguya's younger sister practiced chakra in a different method. This method of using chakra would become known as magic, and would be developed much sooner than Ninshu would be, with Kaguya's son, being Hagoromo Otsutsuki, being the one to develop ninjutsu, and Ashura and Indra taking that up, that being almost 3 generations later. Meanwhile, Kagura would be off in her own land, this being far west out in the wilderness, far outside of the great nations that were already blooming into the ancient history of the Warring States period that it was in, before Kaguya Tsutsuki would take over the lands. While Kagura would be out, she would actually have run into a group of native humans, those who had been out living in the wilderness their entire clan's life. This clan would be filled with hunters and gatherers who had no need or use of the power of chakra, but still had to battle these chakra-filled beasts that roamed the lands every single day. And so they were physically more adept than the humans who lived in the great nations, who already had a somewhat established society even before the Otsutsuki had arrived. And so Kagura would actually be the one to bless the humans here with her chakra. This small group of about 80 people would come to worship Kagura. With Kagura's new life and identity as now the queen of this entire society, she would change her name officially to Jashin. Jashin had decided to do this in order to avoid Kaguya's power and influence, considering if any humans were to come out this far and heard of Kagura and brought it back to her sister, Kaguya might try and find her to wipe her out and take her chakra, which was already pretty close to happening when they had first arrived on the planet. As I mentioned earlier, Kagura has a unique use of chakra, something different than the other Utsutsukis. Although her chakra was far weaker than Kaguya or Ishiki, she had a different practice of using it. Instead of using jutsu in the common terms that the Otsutsuki would, she had actually developed her own method of using chakra. For example, think of the Otsutsuki's current method of using jutsu as a coal fire burning to create the fire of the jutsu itself, with the chakra being the coal. In Kagura's case, or Jashin, she had actually created jutsu that could be invoked without having to use hand seals, which would consume less chakra. This is what she named her invocations. Invocations would actually be the first development of her step to creating a society completely reliant on the use of magic. Now, before I get into further depth on what happens to Kagura, or as she became known by her later followers, Jashin, there are only a few other things I'll mention about the lore of how Kagura's effect on this world happened. Aside from creating the practice of magic and teaching her followers out in the wilderness how to use magic, causing them to have much faster casting times than jutsu, since they don't have to remember any hand seals, they simply need to know this word to invoke the spell in order to actually bend the chakra, thus creating the image of seals over their hands from chakra. And as we all know, chakra has to be incredibly strong to appear visually. So magic in general is a far more efficient use of chakra than jutsus are, with jutsus wasting a ton of chakra on hand seals, as well as just having to control chakra throughout your entire body, while invocations, on the other hand, rely on your contract. Now, I'll be getting into that later once I start Naruto's story, as well as what's going on and how Naruto is part of this group. But you guys may already notice a few things from just the exposition that I've given you. And with that history now behind us, we can actually get into the very start of the story with what if Naruto was a warlock. It all starts with Minato. Minato in this timeline would still be in the Leaf Village, and he and Kushina would still have had their romance blooming from since they were children. Minato growing up and now being one of the strongest shinobi in the entire Leaf Village. Our story starts about 3 or 4 years before the actual start of the Naruto story, before the attack of the Nine Tails. This being before Minato and Kushina were actually officially together. Minato would be out on a mission that he would have been sent on alone. Minato still having his run-on-sight order from all other shinobi villages, and the Third Shinobi War still raging on, Minato would have been sent by himself to go and infiltrate espionage and gain information on the Cloud Village and where it was planning to strike. He would actually rendezvous between 2 different nations, that being the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Cloud, and he would be going alone. His Team Kakashi, Obito, and Rin not having been formed yet, this would be Minato's task. A task he would have to take alone. Minato would sneak towards the Cloud Village, using his flying Raijin with his kunai as he then appears ever closer, getting within range of the village. Something that Minato wouldn't have counted on, though, was a sensory net that the village would have put up around the Cloud Village. With Minato entering into the chakra field, he would eventually have been detected by the Cloud Shinobi, with them now planning to ambush him. Minato actually would get close enough to the village where he'd be surprised, not seeing a many shinobi, thinking they might be out fighting. That is, until he'd be ambushed. Minato would turn to see the Raikage charging at him full speed with a lightning cloak, about to pierce Minato with an attack. Minato would have to tank it, he was too close, there was no way you could even activate the flying Raijin in time, and so Minato would try and block the attack, with him getting damaged severely. Minato gets sent flying backwards as he lands in some shrubbery, pulling himself up thinking, damn, as he tries to run. Cloud Shinobi chasing him as he runs further and further north. Minato, though, was injured, and the Cloud Shinobi would continue to give chase, with him getting closer and closer as the miles continued to pass. Eventually, Minato would fall over, completely out of stamina, not having the same stamina as Kushina or Uzumaki. Damn it. Minato would be thinking, is this where the Yellow Flash dies? What the hell is that, Minato be thinking? Suddenly, a burst of red-crimson flame would come blasting out from the trees behind him, as he would look up, seeing two strangely cloaked figures, both wearing weird masks, and dark, thick woolen cloaks covering them and blocking them from the snow far up here in the north. "Stay out of this," the Cloud Shinobi would say, with the strange figures standing in the way, them now actually fighting off all of the shinobi that had given chase to the yellow flash, and actually winning. Hang it, yeah. Minato could see it clearly this time, as a blast of lightning would then emerge from them without them using any hand seals, simply flicking their wrist upwards. We would then see as Minato notices next to them, they would each have a strange animal, perched on one's shoulder and the other walking by their side. It would be a pitch black falcon with white milky eyes. And at the other cloaked figure's side would be a large ram, with huge silver horns sticking out of its skull, curling behind it. What is this? Minato would be thinking. He'd never seen any summoning creatures like this before. Minato would be surprised, as the two figures would easily dispatch all of the shinobi before they could escape, with the shinobi not having enough time to cast any jutsu before they could just blast them with their own attacks. Minato would be shocked and surprised, wondering what kind of Kekkei Genkai this could be. With some of the Cloud Shinobi being slaughtered, the others would begin to run away, with them not allowing it. The one on the left with the crow would then send it flying upwards, as it then flies off into the sky. Suddenly we would see a dark flash of lightning as it strikes down, as we hear screams, then silence. The crow would turn back, as it then lands on its master's shoulder, with the master turning around and pulling her cloak down, and pulling off her mask. "Well, aren't you a cutie?" she'd say, as you would see a stranger, a tall woman standing there with black hair and silver eyes. "Can you understand me?" she'd ask. Minato would nod, shocked, as the other stranger would turn, this being her brother, with him having black spiky hair and him also having the same silver eyes, making a k sound. "Those shinobi always piss me off. We should just go wipe them all out already." "You know we can't do that, brother." The two getting into a small quarrel in front of Minato. Minato would pull himself up, thanking the two, as they would notice his wound on his chest. "Here, let me get that for you," she'd say, as she would then talk to her crow in that strange language that they'd been using earlier. The crow would then fly over as it begins nibbling at Minato's wound. Minato would try to swipe the crow away, but the crow would just dodge and continue doing it before Minato notices what's going on. As the crow's beak continues piercing his skin, it would be revitalizing him as other parts where it wasn't being bitten were actually healing faster, with the crow finally finishing up as Minato's wound would be closed. "Wow, thanks." The crow would caw at him, with it flying then back to his master, with her introducing herself. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Blondie. I'm Aletta, and the lug over here is Kurobu." "Aletta? Kurobu?" Minato would say, pulling himself up. Minato, now brushing himself off as the blood on his jacket would still remain, would then look up, meeting their eyes. He then introduced himself, saying that his name is Minato Namikaze. Minato would be expecting some sort of reaction to this, considering by this point in the war and in the world, he would be pretty famous by now. Not as famous as he'd be as the 4th Hokage, but still, up to the point where most people would know his name just by hearing it. The two would be staring at him, with Kurobu and Aletta holding a straight face, before their cheeks would puff up as they start laughing. "What kind of name is that?" "Huh?" Minato would ask. "Oh, whatever." Aletta would giggle. This would cause Minato to feel weirdly uncomfortable. Aletta would then pat him on the shoulder, saying that since his chakra's not revived yet, they should probably head back to the village. "Why don't you come along with us?" With you? Village? Out here? This is in the uncharted territories. Why would there be a village out here?" The two mages would look to each other before looking back to Minato, saying, "Just come with them," as they grab him by the arms and start walking, with the two being surprisingly strong. "What? Minato would drop his kunai as he just continues walking away with them, eventually making it far enough to where they would get to the village. Minato would turn as they then show him off to everyone, with there being a great huge tree in the middle of the forest, and for some reason this entire area wouldn't have snow covering it. Almost as if though winter had spared this single spot, the entire area would have been de-thawed, and even sun would be coming through. "What? How is this possible?" Minato would be asking. "It's just magic," they'd say. Magic? You've got to be kidding me," Minato would be thinking. Minato and pretty much no one in the Great Nations actually knows about magic or the warlocks or mages that live out in the Great Wilderness, or anything about Kagura or Jashin, except for a few people. Minato would meet the elders of the village and would be invited to stay there for as long as he needs to rest and recover. Minato ends up staying in the village for half a year, enjoying the peace of not having to fight in war. Minato himself feeling sort of guilty about not going home. Through this half a year, Aletta and Minato had actually gotten closer, to the point where they had actually fallen in love. Minato was now torn. He didn't want to leave the person he loved behind, but he also knew that the village needed him. Aletta, hearing that Minato was having thoughts about leaving, would go and meet him in his quarters that night, with her showing up as Minato asks what she's doing there before she passionately kisses him. Everything else sort of leads into history. Minato would leave the village, using his flying Raijin technique to get back to the Leaf Village. Aletta would smile, but she'd also have tears in her eyes, thinking, "I hope you come back to visit," as she then rubs her stomach. Kurobu would have no idea what was going on, with him being incredibly dense, as I mentioned before. Outside of the village of Alabasta, which is the location that the name of the village was, Minato would now be back in the Third Great Shinobi War, the Leaf Village having been on the back foot when the Yellow Flash had seemingly died. With Minato having reappeared and coming home, Kushina would be extremely happy, but she wouldn't know why Minato looked so sad. Minato would have something different about him now, when he said that he had been captured, Minato saying he had escaped. Minato would then get back into the war and would be even more ruthless than before, killing off multiple battalions and fighting off the rest of the war, until eventually the Third Great Shinobi War would end. Minato, after having returned, would have been assigned to a team with Kakashi, Rin, and Obito, which was for partially to train them, as well as for them to keep an eye on Minato so he wouldn't disappear again, him being one of the Leaf's key figures, and one of the strongest, able to stop the war from happening. Minato, after the war ended, would appear relieved, and Kushina would have been trying to make advances on him multiple times by now, with Minato being more distant, with her and him having some relationship before this point, Kushina having actually liked Minato after he had saved her when they were younger. But Minato at this point wouldn't be reoccurring the same feelings. All that Minato could think about was Aletta. After that half a year of together, where she had been working with him, and Minato had felt peace for the first time and someone who actually cared about him and his feelings, and not just being a tool, Minato had felt completely changed. After the Third Great Shinobi War ended, all he could think about was going back to that place. But unfortunately for him, that would be when the third Hokage would offer him the title of being the next Hokage. This practically being his dream. He had to choose. He had to choose if he wanted to be with the person he loved, or do what he was meant to be born to do, which he had been working forward to since he was a child, working to become the Hokage of the village he grew up in. Minato would bite his tongue hard as he said, "I'm so sorry," feeling a crack in his heart. Kushina would be a bit bitter and confused as to why Minato doesn't reciprocate the feelings that she thought they both had before he disappeared, but she wouldn't push it, considering who Kushina is. And so Kushina and Minato would both be alone. Minato being the first Hokage in a long time since around Tobirama's era who didn't have a family. Minato, still taking his responsibility as the fourth Hokage, would eventually have to come to face Obito. Obito now would be still trying to find a way to take the Nine Tails. With Kushina not being pregnant in this timeline at all, Minato would be effectively in hard control. Without that opening, Obito would have no idea when to release the Nine Tails. That is until a few years later, about 3 or 4 years, I should say, when Minato suddenly dies one day, and Hiruzen is forced back into being the third Hokage. Minato would die young, and no one would have any idea why. Minato had had heartbreak for a long time now. Minato himself not having any real goal as being the Hokage. He had thought he wanted this, but after everything, it just wasn't what he really wanted anymore, and it was too late to leave now. So Minato would die in the office of Hokage, with him being effectively the youngest Hokage to die. Minato, having seemingly no causes of death, would cause suspicion amongst the Uchiha, particularly Fugaku, as having assassinated the 4th Hokage. This would be the seeds that caused Danzo to actually start the Uchiha's demise with Itachi. Hundreds of miles away, further north in the village of Alabasta, we would see Aletta and her son, this being Asura. The way that children were named in the further villages was using magic. They would use tarot-like cards in order to determine the name of the child, with Asura, who I'll be referring to as Naruto from this point forward, having a strong affinity for the sun, this being his yin and yang chakra from his reincarnation cycle. This was a good blessing amongst the Alabasta villagers, with the sun representing great power, as well as it being one of the rarest finds, with usually the 4 main natures being the ones that show up, and a series of names being picked from there. Asura was a special title, and Aletta couldn't be any happier, with her son having the same blonde bright hair that his father had. Naruto's eyes would be silver like the moon, just like hers though, and she would love her son very much. Naruto would have his Uncle Kurobu, and Uncle Kurobu and Aletta would practically raise him together, with Kurobu not really having a family of his own at this point. Naruto would be raised along in the village like the other kids, but he would always be different, with pretty much no one else having blonde hair like he did. He would still be accepted by everyone, with the village giving him as much love for him as the other children. Naruto would be raised in the village of Alabasta and would learn to become a warlock, just like his mother and his uncle Kurobu. Eventually, the time would come when Naruto would be 6 years old, this being the same time as the Uchiha massacre happening. Naruto, having finally reached 6 years old, would be reaching his coming-of-age trial, his first ever step to becoming a true warlock and mage. That is, him making his summoning. Every mage, when they turned 6 years old in the village, would actually create a summoning with their blood, pouring it into the middle of the great tree that protected the village. And then, a sacred animal, this being a special chakra animal, would be summoned, based off of the wielder's soul, their nature. Naruto and the other kids would all be partaking in this event, with the sacrificial blade them cutting their own hand in order to actually make this contract. It would be the first big deal and allow Naruto to actually use magic. Naruto would come home from his lessons that day as he runs over to his mom. "Mommy, I did it! I mastered an invocation to make fire," Naruto would say, with his eyes gleaming, his cheeks sticking up. Naruto in this version would still have the 3 whiskers on his cheeks, a trait that we would have no idea where he gets from, considering neither Aletta nor Minato would have this. Naruto would show his mom, as he then uses the incantation for fire, holding his hand out as a small spark would then spurt into the air before being blown out by the freezing cold winds. Kurobu would laugh, patting his nephew on the head, saying, "Good try, kid, but until you can do it like your old man here." Him holding his hand out and then casting a flame spell, burning down several shrubberies as a huge column of flame would be blasted out. "Then you're not as good as me," he'd say, with him smirking at the kid. Naruto would look up kind of angry. He starts fake punching his dad in the ankles. Naruto does not know that Uncle Kurobu, which he calls dad, isn't his real father. Everyone else in the village does, but no one's told him, since it's kind of a heavy topic and most of the villagers were pretty upset when they heard Aletta was pregnant with Minato's kid, the traveler who had come to their village during that time. The day would eventually come for the ceremony, and Aletta and Kurobu, as long as the rest of the other villagers, would be going to it, with them all standing around the great tree as the kids would be led upstairs, going towards the center of the roots, this being the place where their Lady Jashin had her final moments. As you all can guess, this is where her body is, this being a god tree. Her divine tree would not be meant to harm the people though, as she had no means to take their chakra, nor desire to. Instead, it was a way of giving her own chakra, blessing the next generation. As Naruto would then take his hand, grit his teeth, and slice his palm, as his blood would then fall down to the roots below, touching to the base of the tree. Unlike the other kids where the tree would not do any effect or anything, they would just have a summoning animal appear out of their shadow popping up, as it would then begin to make the contract with them having to prove themselves to the spirit. Naruto, when he places his blood into the tree, will cause something different to happen. Him, after all, being a reincarnation of a half Otsutsuki. her divine tree, Kagura's, would respond to Kaguya, her sister's chakra. The tree would begin to glow a golden light, with the seniors of the village as well as the villagers being impressed and terrified, never having seen their god tree having actually done this before. Aletta would be pretty worried about her son, running up to make sure he was okay. Naruto would be staring down to the pool of light, as at the very bottom of the tree he would see something. Naruto would begin to slide down the tree as everyone would tell him to watch out, as they would try to reach him before he fell. As Naruto getting to the base of the tree would see a silver light, Naruto reaching out and feeling fluffiness. Everyone would be shocked. With all the other kids having only received the contract with their spirit, Naruto would have fully summoned his spirit. This being a silver white-maned fox, its pure white fur glowing like the moonlight. The villagers would be stunned at its beauty, with the creature having the same silver moon-like eyes that Naruto and Aletta had. Naruto would pet the creature as he says, "Are you for me?" The fox would nod, knowing Naruto, as the two would make a contract. With Naruto now riding on the fox's back as he would climb back up to the top of the tree. Everyone would be shocked and surprised before the elders start yelling at Naruto, now patting him and punching him on the head at the same time, Naruto saying he's sorry, with them telling him not to ever do that to the divine tree again. With them also being slightly impressed that a child of this age summoned a full spirit. Now, for those of you who don't understand what happened, most of the other kids summoned the shadows of their spirit, and that shadow being something that would eventually grow into a fully animal form, exactly like how Aletta and Kurobu had their own respective fully formed animal contracts, with every person in the village who was to be a warlock having to sign a contract with the spirit animal, this otherworldly power, in order to boost their own ability to use magic, as well as give them abilities that other chakra wielders just simply wouldn't have. With their soul creating a spirit-like animal, far more powerful than any summoning animal that Minato or Jiraiya or any shinobi could summon. The kids in Naruto's class would actually be pretty jealous, as Naruto as well as them would bring their shadow, or Naruto bringing his actual spirit with him, this being the silver fox, with them to class, with their next assignment to be to name their familiar. Most of the kids would have to wait until their shadow developed more defined so they could see some key features, but Naruto's teacher would then encourage him to try and pick a name as soon as possible, something that fit his familiar. The stronger your connection is with your familiar, Naruto, the more powerful you both become. Naruto would turn over looking at his silver fox cub, patting her on the head. For some reason, after her original summoning, his fox familiar had actually grown smaller, with everyone else in the village having theorized that it was due to Naruto's lack of power at this point, but that's probably what its fully grown form looks like. The yin to his yang, the moon to his sun, as you could say. Aletta would decide to help her son choose a name, with Aletta explaining to her son how she named her crow look-alike falcon, Kuros. It's a word that means death, which is pretty cool in my opinion, she'd say. Is that really a good enough reason to name your familiar? Naruto would ask. I don't see why not, Aletta would say. You know, Mom, you're pretty strange, Naruto would say. Am I? Aletta would say. This would cause Naruto to giggle and then laugh, as Kurobu would walk into the room asking what's so funny. Oh, nothing. We're talking about names, since Naruto here still hasn't decided on a name for his familiar, with Aletta reaching over and petting Naruto's fox cub who was sitting in his lap, the young fox cub moving her head towards her master's mother's hand, enjoying her warm hand and the free head pats. The fox cub would then flick her tail and ear, now moving her head towards Aletta. Aletta would giggle as Kuros would look jealous at its master, pecking at her cheek. Aw, you jealous? Maybe you'll have to take both of you. Naruto would look up saying, hey, that's not fair. You already have your familiar. This one's mine, Naruto would say, pulling his fox cub up to his chest, the fox looking up and licking Naruto's chin with him smiling. Kurobu would then explain that the name you choose depends on your personality. Now look, kid, if you really want to name your familiar something dumb like your mom here, you go ahead. Hey, it is not dumb, she would say, with Aletta being slightly to moderately offended by this. Naruto still hadn't come up with a name, but it was alright since most of the other kids in his class hadn't either. And by this point, Naruto was already 12 years old. Naruto almost being towards the age of adulthood, which in the village was considered 15. Naruto would look to his mom, giving her a hug as it would be his first practical test, with him and his teacher having to actually fight that day, using magic. Now, Naruto is no Neji or Sasuke when it comes to using magic, and he isn't naturally gifted at controlling it very much, but he loved doing magic. Ever since he saw his mom and his dad doing it when he was little, he wanted to create huge flame pillars like his dad, or be able to strike thunder down like his mom. So Naruto would gulp as he then heads out for school, with him running off to the training grounds where he and the other kids who had successfully developed their Shikigami, or their spirit guards, with them to the point where they could battle. Naruto's obviously being the most developed, since the other kids wouldn't be having theirs developed to that point until they were at least 15 to 20. Naruto, of course, would be picked first, with the teacher deciding to teach him a lesson, thinking that this outsider could actually defeat him. Naruto would smile as he then summons forth his fox Kitsune, while the professor would summon forth a huge crocodile, with white and black scales mixed with blue streaks over it, as he would then summon forth Allegra. "Allegra, destroy them with me," he would say, smiling. "Sensei, aren't you going a little too hard?" Naruto would say. Naruto knew that this guy was obviously trying to teach him a lesson, but he wouldn't get away with it. "Transform," Naruto would say. Naruto, using his Kitsune's powers, would transform himself and the Kitsune into two beautiful fox girls, holding each other's hands, as Naruto effectively created his own sexy jutsu. With the sensei being completely caught off guard, his nose would begin to bleed, as Naruto then says, "Now." His Kitsune transforming back into a wolf, charging forward with him as they create a big blue fall of fire, now smashing it into the master, sending him flying back to the ground. Naruto winning. What was that? What was that magic technique? That's not even fair," the master would say, saying that that's completely barbarous to use as a mage. Naruto would smile, saying, "Well, it worked, didn't it?" with him and his fox looking at each other as he then rubs her fur, petting her over the ears. "Come on, girl, let's watch the other fights." The teacher would obviously be pretty pissed, having watched Naruto, this outsider in his mind, having defeated him, and would decide that he had to teach him a lesson later. Naruto would watch the other fights, as most of them would lose, with multiple of them actually getting pretty close to beating their sensei though, Naruto giving them a fist bump, with most of the kids at this point actually liking Naruto, considering he was fun to play with. And this Naruto isn't as neglected as the one from the original timeline, since he doesn't have any demons inside of him, and even if he did, in this village everyone does, so it's sort of normal. Anyway, Naruto would go home that day as he tells Aletta and Kurobu, his mom and dad, about everything, with Aletta patting her son on the head and giving him a kiss on the forehead before tucking him into bed that night. Naruto would feel some fluffiness as he would then hear her jump up, his fox cub now crawling next to him as she rests her head on his arm, with him feeling a soft purring like from her. Naruto would pat her with his other hand, saying she's a good girl and that they did really well today in their fight. Little would Naruto know it would be coming soon, what would be coming to the village, something that would change his life forever. As Naruto stares out his window that night, looking up into the winter night sky, he would see a full moon, as he then comes up with the idea for her name. He would suddenly jump up, picking up his fox cub with her confused, turning her ears to the side as she looks at her master, her silver eyes reflecting the light off the moon. As Naruto runs out with his familiar, running into the main room where his mom and dad were sitting, as he then says to his mom, "I know what I'm gonna name her. I'm gonna name her Suki, like the moon." His familiar would turn to look at him with her tongue sticking out, happy with this, as Naruto would say, "You like that, Suki? Huh?" "Suki? Kurobu would think. "That's not a bad name. It's better than your mom's dumb one, at least." Suddenly, she would jab him in the ribs, causing him to cough, as she would say, "Sweetie, that's a lovely name," with Naruto smiling, saying, "I know, right? I never thought I could come up with something that good." Suki, huh?" The fox would turn, liking her new name, as suddenly a glow would begin to cover her fur, as she began to grow in size, now appearing in the size of a normal fox. "You got bigger, Suki," Naruto would say. "Now you're even more fluffy." Aletta would be thinking that it's weird how Naruto's familiar is changing size, but she wouldn't worry about it too much, with her thinking it must be Minato's fault. As she thinks of Minato, she'd feel sad for a bit, with her deciding that she has to tell her son about this soon. She has to tell him about his father. Naruto would go to bed, Suki curling beside him, as Naruto would be living his best life, just becoming a warlock, a mage, and his parents were both proud of him. Naruto was happy. But of course, as in all good anime, all happy stories have to come to an end. Make sure to go watch part 2, where I'll be covering What If Naruto Was a Warlock part 2, as well as what's going to happen in this big life-changing event. I hope you guys enjoyed this part. Make sure you hit the like button if you want more stuff like this. This is the most fan fiction What If I've really done, and I really enjoyed writing it. I think Aletta and Kurobu were my first attempts at writing deeper fan fiction-like characters. I did this before with Blaze Realis, but not nearly as in-depth personality-wise. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Anyway, I hope you all have a good Halloween, and if you don't see part 2 later, it'll probably be coming out later tonight since this all has to render. I'll see you guys then. Goodbye.